And Query Building with MedDRA webinar. My name is Anne Jüllenswert. I'm one of the international medical officers at the MedDRA MSSO, and that is the function where I and my colleagues look at change requests and decide whether we put new terms into MedDRA or whether we make changes to the hierarchy of existing terms. In addition, I'm one of the MedDRA MSSO representatives at the ICH M1PTC working group. And there I'm joining together with my colleague, our Chief Medical Officer, Marina Di Giusti, and we're facilitating the meetings of the group and doing the editing on the documents. So for the session, I will not keep my camera on, but I thought it's nicer to say hello by having the camera on. So let me just turn it off and rearrange my screens a bit. Oops, this was not. Okay. So as you know, we always have some disclaimer slides, and with this one, I would like to tell you that MedDRA is a product of ICH, the International Council for Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceuticals for Human Use. And the ICH tasked the MedDRA MSSO, the MedDRA Maintenance and Support Service Organization, to maintain the terminology. And our activities are overseen by the ICH MedDRA Steering Committee. There was a recent change. This was previously called the MedDRA Management Committee, but is now called Steering Committee. And with that change, there's also been a change in the composition, which was previously the founding members of ICH, the European Communion, FPR as their Pharma Society Association, the FDA from the United States, the regulator Health Canada, JPMA, and the Japanese regulators, the MHRA, Pharma, and the WHO. And in addition, since May 2025, there are 3 more representatives which are appointed on a just for 3 years. And these are the Chinese regulator NMPA, the Saudi Arabia SFDA, and the International Pharmaceutical Association IFPMA. And these are appointed as observers until 2028. Then regarding this presentation, the presentation is protected by copyright, but with the exception of the MedDRA and the ICH logos, you may use it and incorporate it into your works, but please make sure that you denote all the modifications and changes and demarcate that these are yours, but not endorsed by ICH or the MSSO. The second bullet is legal language, and I will just read it out. The presentation is provided as is without warranty of any kind. In no event shall the ICH or the authors of the original presentation be liable for any claim, damages, or other liability arising from the use of the presentation. The above mentioned permissions do not apply to content supplied by third parties, but for this presentation, we don't have any third-party content, so this is not valid today. Okay, then let's look at what we are going to discuss today. We will look at the important document, the MedDRA data retrieval and presentation points to consider document. We will discuss the application of MedDRA in a data retrieval and presentation. So how can you use MedDRA to make the most of your data for analysis? And we will start discussing and demonstrating how MedDRA can be used for developing queries. And then we will conclude with a question and answer session, but I will also ask Leander whether there were any questions in between, and we can address them as we go. Okay. Then before we start going into our presentation, I would like to check with you whether you can join the polling tool, and up on the screen you have the QR code for joining our Slido tool, or you join at slido.com with the number 2157877. I will give you a few minutes, and I have some few questions for you to see, to make you to help you log into the tool and then to see whether it's working for you. But I would also like to use these questions to understand better who has been joining today, who is the audience, so that we can maybe tailor the presentation a bit to your needs. So I hope you all had the chance to enter the Slido tool. And with that, I would ask you, where are you joining from today? So let's wait a few seconds, see whether you manage. So some people are joining from Germany. I see Taiwan, Czechia, India is becoming a big bubble, Poland, California. So I think we are very well representing the whole world. Croatia, a lot of European countries. Hyderabad, India, Slovenia is getting bigger. Kazakhstan, I see. Lithuania, Switzerland, quite a lot of people joining from Switzerland. So we give it a few more minutes. I think maybe half the people managed to join the polling tool and answer. Okay, and I see, oh, South Africa as well. Okay, let's move on to the next question, which is, I would like to know what your role in your company is. And you have a multiple choice question, or maybe, no, this is typing. So pharmacovigilance associate, QPPV, PV experts, PV assessor, data managers. I think I see a lot of PV, pharmacovigilance, some medical affairs. Okay, so all the people who need to look at the data, and very few data managers who are coding the data, but it's also important that the data managers know what happens to the data after they've nicely coded it. But it's good to see that there is a lot of interest from the pharmacovigilance professionals. Great. I don't see anybody else typing, so let's move on. The next question is, how would you rate your knowledge of using MedDRA to retrieve and analyze data? And you can judge your knowledge by 1 beginner until 5 experts. I see we have a good representation, some beginners, some who are intermediate, and some people who are a bit more expert. Okay, I think that's nice to have this distribution. And I will make sure that I start from scratch, but I hope it's not too easy for the ones who already have a lot of knowledge about how to use MedDRA, that they will also be able to learn something new at least. Okay, thanks a lot for answering. And let's move on to the next question. And this is again an open slide. What are benefits of using MedDRA? And this is just an open question. What you think is valuable about MedDRA? And I see standardization, which is what I hoped for, harmonization, a common language, all things which are very important. Harmonization, standardization, yes. To communicate with other companies, exactly. Very well. Somebody noticed how to just make use of the previous ones, better use of medical data, case processing, yes, all important things. Quality, I like that one. definition, code for signal detection, uniformity, using the same terms for processing AEs. So I think standardization and harmonization are still the most common quoted ones. Better decisions, yes. Good data helps making better decisions. Mutual understanding. Safety reporting and analysis, what we are going to talk about today, a common PV language. Okay, thanks a lot for giving all these answers. Good. And with that, I think we have seen enough. And I would like to start with the main presentation. So what we are starting with is looking at the ICH guidance document, which is applicable to our topic today, which is the MedDRA Data Retrieval and Presentation Points to Consider document. And here you have the front page of that document. And this is the document which provides data retrieval and presentation options, and which should be used by industry and regulators so that we keep the standardization of the terminology by using it in the same way. And to be able to use the MedDRA in a standardized way for data retrieval and presentation, it's very important to use this document in conjunction with the MedDRA term selection points to consider document, which talks a lot about the coding principles and how data should be coded. Coding is always the first step, and data retrieval is then the next step. But if you code your data in a consistent way and then retrieve it in a consistent way, you are working on harmonization, standardization, and better decisions, as we saw. So this document is recommended to be used as a basis for individual organizations' own data retrieval conventions. And we come to that it's important to note down your processes and how you use the document. Okay. The MedDRA Data Retrieval and Presentation Points to Consider document is a document developed by the ICH M1 PTC working group. It's one of the ICH groups. It is updated annually and released on March 1st, together with the other data term selection points to consider document. Complete versions are available in a number of languages, and you can see them here. We are still working on new updates, so this slide might be slightly outdated. And for other versions, we have condensed versions available, so that if you're targeting to understand it better in your own language, please check whether you can find it in your language. And these documents are available on the MedDRA and JMO website. And I will take this as a means to show you where you can find these documents on our MedDRA.org website. So if you're entering the MedDRA.org website, you go to How to Use, and then Support Documentation. It usually starts in the English version, but here you can select your language, and then you find the Points to Consider documents and the MedDRA Best Practice documents on the blue highlighted uppermost field here. And you see we have the document, the MedDRA term selection points to consider document, as a PDF version, as a Word document, and as a web site. We also provide these documents in a redline version. And you can see here the MedDRA data retrieval and presentation points to consider document, also available in the different file formats, as well as a redline version. In addition, we have a points to consider companion document, which is also relevant for our topic today because it has a section on quality, as well It gives a lot of detailed examples for coding, for example, medication errors, product use issues, and manufacturing and quality system issues. And then we have a MedDRA best practice document, which might also be interesting for you, because this document provides guidance on upversioning of MedDRA data. So it might also be meaningful to consider this document for certain questions. Okay, let's move back. So looking at the data retrieval and presentation points to consider document, this document addresses, on the one hand, general principles on the quality of source data, documentation principles, the very important principle of not altering MedDRA. It discusses organization-specific data characteristics which need to be considered, characteristics that impact data retrieval and analysis, which are specific to MedDRA. We're going to look into more detail into these principles, as well as it discusses a bit about MedDRA versioning. Then it gives some general guidance on queries and retrieval, and also talks about standardized MedDRA queries and customized searches. Both of these last points are not part of the content of this webinar today, but we will have a dedicated webinar next week where we talk about standardized MedDRA queries and customized searches. So if you're interested in learning more about these topics, please register for the webinar next week as well. Okay. Let's look at the first general principle, which is quality of source data. And as always, we always say high quality data output is dependent on maintaining the quality of the original information reported. So trash in, trash out, as we often say. And for adding high quality data, please refer to the MedDRA term selection points to consider document and the coding guidance provided there, as well as in the companion document, we have that quality section, which I already addressed. Make sure that you use all the means possible, like follow-up, requesting follow-up information to have a high quality data from the beginning. Because once you have the data in your database coded, the longer the time evolves, it is harder to go back to the initial, in clinical trials, to the principal investigator, or to go back to the reporter in pharmacovigilance to get more information about a certain adverse event, adverse drug reaction. Then for the quality of source data, it's also important to know and to consider what kind of method of conversion of data into MedDRA has been used. So this can impact, for example, legacy data which was coded in a different terminology. So it could be that you have data in ICD or in SNOMED or in any other legacy or another terminology, which you need to convert into MedDRA. And the way you can do this is you could use one of our mappings, or check whether there are terms which have direct matches to MedDRA, and you could either do this for the verbatim in that other terminology, or you could do it for the coded terms. And if you do the data conversion on the verbatim, you need to invest more time and effort because you would do a manual recoding. If you use the coded term, you could use mapping, so it's less, it might be less effort, but depending on the other terminology, you might lose information because not every terminology is as granular as MedDRA, or the granularity in certain parts of that terminology might be higher or lower than the MedDRA terminology. So you might lose some specificity when you're doing the data conversion on coded terms. It's also important to consider conversion of data when you're thinking about companies exchanging data. It's not usually you exchange MedDRA coded data, but you would need to consider that the one company might have slightly different coding conventions than the other company. It might be important to check those coding conventions over time and in general on how well these match what you are doing. So thinking about data quality and the source of the data which you add to your database is very important. And also to know what happened in the past, to be able to adapt your search strategies to the data which you're looking at. And then we already come to the documentation. For being able to assess your data, it's very important that you also document what you're doing. So you should have organization-specific guidelines, which of course should be consistent with the points to consider documents, and they should describe what exactly you're doing in your coding. So organization-specific coding conventions. And remember that the points to consider term selection document provides the possibility to choose between two options. We often have the preferred approach and an alternate approach. And companies should define which approach they take and keep that consistent and document that in coding conventions, for example. Then it's also important to document how you retrieve your data and what kind of output strategies you have. There, of course, include how you use SMQs in that process. It's important to have quality assurance procedures. So every search which you do should be quality checked. Your searches which you set up, it's important to have a quality assurance procedure on these, and to document what kind of quality assurance you do on in your data retrieval. Then it's very important to know the MedDRA version which you use for each search, and it's very important that you use the same MedDRA version in your search strategy in which your data is coded. And that also means that you need to upversion your MedDRA search strategies according to the way you upversion your data. And as you know, we always add new MedDRA terms with each version. So before using a MedDRA version on even if you upversion it for the MedDRA terms, you would also need to check whether new MedDRA terms have been added, which would be meaningful in your search and where you might otherwise lose cases. Then document the search strategy methods. This is important because you might want to redo them after a certain time period. For example, if you use a search strategy in your periodic safety update reports, you might want to use the same or a similar updated search strategy in the next period you're looking at. Also, between different products, you might have the same safety topic, and the search strategy used for one product might also be relevant for another product. So if you have a good documentation of how the search strategy was set up, how it was used, how it was maintained, you can save some efforts and maybe reuse this search strategy for the next product. I already mentioned that it's important to upversion and to also document what kind of processes, what kind of steps you take in your upversioning process so that people can understand what you did and maybe redo it in the same way. And then you should have processes for customized MedDRA queries. These are queries which are organization specific, and they can be called in different ways, but customized MedDRA query is quite a common denomination for that. So it's important to describe who in your organization is setting up a MedDRA query. Is there a quality check procedure by another person? Is there a group looking at a MedDRA query, or is it just one person? It's up to your organization to define a process, but it's good if you have a process and if you document that process. Okay. Then the next principle, which is very important, is do not alter MedDRA. And this is, as you mentioned, very important because MedDRA is a standardized terminology and it has a predefined term hierarchy. And we come to that hierarchy in later slides, but it's important to keep that hierarchy and not to make any ad hoc changes to the primary SOC allocation, for example. And some coding tools will allow you to code not to the primary, but to a secondary SOC, but this is really not recommended because it endangers the standardization and harmonization, which is one of the main important things about MedDRA. And it might lead to cases being shown in different SOCs or in a SOC where you don't expect it. So please always keep the primary SOC and the primary hierarchy as defined by MedDRA. If you consider that a term is incorrectly placed, you always have the possibility to submit a change request to the MSSO. And we have the WebCR, the Web Change Request tool for that, which you can find on our website. But also the new MedDRA browser has an inbuilt functionality which can put you to the change request tool. If there is interest in me showing you the change request tool, please put a question into the chat because it's usually not part of this webinar to go into more detail. Okay. Then let's look at the next general principle, which is organization-specific data characteristics. So we can give you the standardized terminology, but you have a lot of things which are on your side. So the database structure. It's important to know how your database is built up, what kind of fields you have. This is important, especially when you're thinking about a query, because you can query more than just MedDRA coded data. So if you're interested in, for example, and that is a standard field, the age field, if you're interested in looking at the AE profile for children, this is not good to start building a MedDRA query, because our MedDRA terms are usually population qualifier free. We have some terms which are neonatal, we have some terms which include male or female if it's important, but usually the population qualifiers are not in the MedDRA terms, and these are in other database fields. So it's good if you know your database structure, because you can use that structure as well for building a meaningful query. Also, when it comes to the MedDRA terminology, it's important to know the database structure because you're coding to LLTs. The verbatim term is coded to an LLT, but then you can store different parts of the MedDRA hierarchy in your database. So the LLT is linked to a PT, and then is linked to the primary and maybe multiple secondary HLTs, the HLGT, and then the SOC. Not all of these hierarchy levels need to be in your database. So it's important to know what kind of fields you have in your database and whether you can query those or not. Then, and this is also data storage, where I already discussed it with the database structure, but the data storage, the level of the term, how many of the hierarchy levels you have, but then also, do you store the verbatim term? Do you store, if you have a synonym list, whether a certain synonym was used for coding? Some databases have a term, a modified verbatim term, or a term to be coded. So knowing what kind of fields your database has can help you in setting up a search strategy. Then data conversion is important. So how do you treat your data? And data conversion is, for example, also upversioning. It's if you receive data from another company, what do you do with that data? If you look at, for example, the age group again, if you're reported with an age, do you also apply age group levels like elderly or child, adolescent? So there are data conversions which are usually applied throughout the database, and it's good to know what kind of data conversions you're doing. I already mentioned that it's important to know coding practices over time, and some are made by your company, others are maybe done because of changes in MedDRA. If you're looking, for example, at the medication error coding, for a long time, MedDRA included very few medication error terms, and then some years back, a huge number of medication error terms were added to MedDRA. So this is a coding practice which changed over time. So going back in time, for medication errors, you will not find the same granularity, the same specificity coded in your case as you would hopefully find now, just because the MedDRA terms were not available and the coding practices needed to change for that. But it can also be that you decide, because you have a new QPPV or you outsource to another company, it might be that you change your coding practices and decide to code differently. And this would be then, if you have a nice documentation, you could go back in time to see what did I do in that year and how did it change, what am I doing now. Then it's important to know the limitations and restrictions of your database. So we already talked about the hierarchy, and many of the MedDRA terms have a primary and a secondary SOC assignment, system organ class assignment. So many databases do not provide the ability to view the secondary assignment because it's more difficult. You have 1 to over 5. So even building the database in such a way might be difficult. But many of these restrictions are, for example, that you cannot view a secondary SOC. Other restrictions can apply to other parts of the database. And then it's also important to know how your company is coding, not only over time, but also how do you interpret the term selection PTC document. And there is, for example, one of those preferred and alternate options, how you code a diagnosis reported with signs and symptoms. If you only select the diagnosis term, you have less case counts. If you select more than one term, one for the diagnosis and then for the potential signs and symptoms, you increase the case counts. And that is important for you to know, because when you're retrieving your data and tabulating it by PT, you would see a lot of the symptoms as without the diagnosis. If you look at an individual case safety report, you would see them together and you could directly link the symptoms to the diagnosis. If you are looking at summary tabulations, those symptoms might increase or highlight terms for you, which you would not be seeing if you're just looking at the diagnosis, if you're just coding the diagnosis term only. So all of these are your decisions, but which also impact the way your data will look when you aggregate it and analyze it. And it's important for you to know what was done before to be able to interpret the data accordingly. I think maybe, Leander, this would be a good time to ask whether there are any questions.
Oh, that's great, Anna. Just on time, because somebody has just sent a question in, so thank you very much. You mentioned that there are old and new LLTs in the MedDRA browser. So when we select the LLT, how could we know which one we are choosing? How could we know it's the right one?
Okay, actually, webinar, but let's go to the browser. And I'll show you, you can open the old web-based browser from here, log into it. And then if you go down, I hope I find one which is good now. Usually, if you're looking at the LLTs, let me just open it differently, the legend, you will see the non-current terms highlighted in red with a square around it. So you would see the LLT name, but instead of having this purple LLT, it would be red and have a red square around it. That would be showing you that it's a non-current term. I hope that answered the question. And usually coding tools would hopefully prevent you from selecting a non-current term. But in the browsers, you can always see these as highlighted with this red LLT name and a square around it.
Thanks, Annie. There's no other questions. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Then let's look a bit more on the MedDRA characteristics. And here we are going to look at the hierarchy. So we have a 5-level hierarchy with the system organ class on top, then the high-level grouping term, the HLGT, and then a high-level term below it. And then we're coming to the PT level, which is the main level for aggregating data and analyzing data, and the LLT, the lowest level term level, which is synonyms to that PT level. So the HLGTs and HLTs provide clinically relevant groupings. So looking at the cardiac disorders, we have an HLGT, and this is not the only one, of course, which is called cardiac arrhythmias. And it groups broadly all cardiac arrhythmias, and the HLTs below that HLGT, they are grouping it further into conduction disorders, rate and rhythm disorders not elsewhere classified, into the supraventricular arrhythmias and the ventricular arrhythmias. So depending on what you're interested in when you're thinking arrhythmia, the HLT level might provide you with more information and a better grouping of terms already. Sometimes you might want to look at HLTs and see counts on the HLT level. Like when you're looking at data, you might first look at the SOC level, see where to focus your attention, and you might do the same on the HLT level. But always make sure that when you're doing this, not all terms might be relevant for your output. So we're looking, for example, at the HLT vascular test NEC, which is one of the investigation HLTs. And you see we have PTs going into both directions. So we have blood pressure decreased and blood pressure increased. And usually you would look at one of those, but not at the combined, what does it do to the blood pressure? So you're more either interested in blood pressure increase into hypertension or that the blood pressure goes down. But usually it's not the interest whether it changes at all. So it's important to have that in mind. Also, please note that we have PTs which might belong into several HLTs. So if you're looking at the Stevens-Johnson syndrome, for example, which is a bullous condition, a very severe skin condition, but it's also exfoliative. So it could also go into the exfoliative conditions HLT. We need to decide when we place the terms in MedDRA into which of those HLTs we put the term, because the multi-axiality is only between different SOCs. So if we are looking at the HLTs within one SOC, we need to decide, do we see the bullous conditions more important for the Stevens-Johnson syndrome PT, or is it more that we want to put it to the exfoliative conditions? We took the decision that it's more important to highlight it's a bullous condition, but of course, in addition, it would also be exfoliative. But based on the MedDRA characteristics, we cannot put it into both HLTs. So these are things which you need to have in mind when you're looking at limitations which are based on the MedDRA characteristics. So on the one hand, an HLT might include terms going into different directions. And on the other hand, a PT might also belong into several HLTs, but can only be placed in one. And this is where we already touched the multi-axiality. And multi-axiality means that a PT is linked to more than one SOC. And we have certain rules for addressing the primary SOC. And we have some, usually we put the PT into a disorder SOC belonging to that organ system where it where it best belongs. There are some SOCs which are allocated with priority, and this is neoplasms, congenital, and infections. Because often these are overarching the organ systems, but they are also very important. So these are allocated primarily if they are allocated, and the disorder SOC would be then the secondary. The multi-axiality has an impact on the frequency of where you would find medical conditions of interest and which should be considered. And if you're thinking about setting up a query for renal abnormalities, you could search in certain SOCs, for example, in the renal and urinary disorders. You could search in the investigation SOC. You could see whether there are any renal procedures and surgical and medical procedures like a renal transplant. And we have a SOC which is called social circumstances, where you could find a PT like artificial kidney device user. And when looking at these SOCs, please note that the three last ones, the investigations, as well as surgical and medical procedures and social circumstances, these SOCs are not multi-axial. So terms in these SOCs will only be found in this SOC. You will not find them in any other SOC. So when designing a search, always consider to look into the investigation SOC, into surgical and medical procedures SOC, and into social circumstances SOC. And when we're coming then to the presentation of data, the main presentation is by primary SOC. This is important because usually when we're presenting a full data set, you don't want to see a PT twice and see the counts several times. That is why a primary SOC is important. And if everybody uses the same primary SOC, you will find a PT like headache. You will always find it in the same SOC. You will not need to search through your data set to find the headache in different SOCs. It will always be in the primary SOC. The secondary SOCs can be used as alternate views, and we will have an exercise where we show how you can do this and why it might be interesting to use the secondary SOCs sometimes. So just to check whether you're still with me and listening, when you're presenting safety data, how would you group PTs? Would you group your PTs under the primary SOC, which is predetermined in the MedDRA hierarchy, or would you decide based on your product specifics which SOC a PT is grouped under? Okay. Let's give it some more time. Okay, and this was not a nice question, I have to say. Because what you should do is, of course, you should, when you're coding, you should use the primary SOC, which is predetermined by the MedDRA hierarchy. And when you're presenting safety data, when you're doing a full presentation, you also show the PTs under the primary SOC. But for certain searches and for certain questions, you might decide, based on your product specifics, to just show one SOC, for example, and then you would also show all the PTs which have a secondary link to that SOC. Or you would do a complete secondary SOC analysis of your PTs and look for those SOCs which you're interested in. So maybe a bit difficult question, and I see also that people, a lot of you said, 83% said yes, we do it after in the primary SOC, which is also the most common and standard way to do it. But some of you thought around the corners and said yes, but sometimes we need the secondary SOC, and I think all of you are right. Okay, then one more question for you. Please identify the non-multi-axial SOCs. And of course, multiple answers are allowed, and I give you a hint. It's 3 of them which you should choose. People are still voting. I'll give it a few more minutes. And also this question I designed in a way that I was trying to confuse you a bit, so okay. I think now quite a lot of people voted, so let's solve this question. So the non-multi-axial SOCs are the ones which just have a link to that SOC. And it's investigations, which was nicely, which many of you chose as the important one. Then it's social circumstances and surgical and medical procedures. The other 3 SOCs which I listed for you, these are the ones which have a higher priority when we're deciding on the primary SOC. So the congenital infections and neoplasm SOCs, these are the ones which have the primary link if they are one of the SOCs which we choose. But investigations, social circumstances, and surgical and medical procedures are the SOCs which are non-multi-axial, where the only link is to that SOC. There is no second link for any PT in those SOCs: investigation, social circumstances, and surgical and medical procedures. And we come back to this several times in this presentation, because it's important when we're building queries to remember these SOCs and to search for terms, because we will not pick them up through any other SOC. Okay. So this is about hierarchy levels. And this could be the output after you did a trial on a small set of patients, 44 patients taking my drug, 25 milligrams, and 15 patients taking placebo. And you're looking at the output for the SOC investigations. And you already see that there is a difference between placebo and my drug if you're looking at the percentages for the complete SOC. So 13.3% of placebo patients had any events in SOC investigations coded, and nearly 30% of the patients who were taking my drug. And then you get a long list of PTs and some counts to these long names: aspartate aminotransferase increased, alanine aminotransferase increased, amylase increased. And then it continues on the next page. So looking at this seems like, oh, okay, I need to think a lot. Where do I focus my attention? Is it the aspartate aminotransferase or the blood creatinine phosphokinase increased? And if you then use the hierarchy and add the HLTs and the counts for the HLTs, suddenly the picture becomes a lot clearer, because first of all, your table becomes shorter, but then you also see, okay, most of my counts for events in my drug, they are in the liver function analyses. Maybe I have a problem with the liver. And then also the tissue enzyme analyses. So you can use the hierarchy to group the terms and focus your attention, because with this you clearly see, okay, liver function analysis is the most important one and the most frequently reported adverse event in patients on my drug. And that is maybe where you should start looking into your data in more detail. Then if you see here, it's very few things, and maybe you would rather go by term name, but not by the frequency counts to prioritize any of the others. So this is a nice example of how HLT grouping can help you. Of course, you could also group in the same way, but also have the PTs, the individual PTs showing under the HLTs, which might also be helpful. Okay, maybe Leander, do we have any questions on this?
Not on that, Anne, but we did have one that asked, how often should organisations update their product information to communicate the most current and up-to-date AE's safety information to healthcare providers in the field, also considering national regulatory authorities? So quite a long question, but how often should we update?
Yeah, this is unfortunately a question which I cannot answer, because it will depend a lot on the regulations for the countries where you have your product. There you would need to check, and then it will also depend on the safety information which you need to add. So some information can be added at time intervals when it suits you. Very important safety information would need to be communicated directly. But unfortunately, I cannot give you an answer to that question.
Thanks, Anne. And just next time you're in the browser, would you mind showing where the legend is? Because we had somebody who asked, what do the other colours mean, the other boxes? So we talked about red being non-current, but what do the other boxes mean? So
yes,
we mind just showing where the legend is when we go there. That's great. Thank you.
Yes, and if I forget, please remind me again, but we will have a browser demonstration later on, and I will take it then. Okay. Then MedDRA versioning. We already discussed that, or you might know that MedDRA is updated twice a year. We have a major version release, which is the .0 release, which affects all MedDRA levels. This is always released in March, on March 1st. And then we have a so-called minor release, where only LLT and PT levels are changed, which is released on September 1st as the .0 release, the .1 release, sorry. So the MedDRA version is released, and then for the pharmacovigilance databases, you would usually switch to that reporting as a reporting version 2 months afterwards. So the first Monday in November and the first Monday in May, I think it should be. And from that onwards, you would have that as your reporting version. And often companies upgrade their pharmacovigilance databases the weekend before. For clinical trials, you need to decide yourself when it is appropriate to update a clinical trial to the next MedDRA version. And you can have lots of considerations why you would keep a trial on a certain MedDRA version for a certain time, why it might make sense for you to upgrade it with every MedDRA version, or whether you just upgrade it at the end of a trial. Considerations can be that you usually do an SAE reconciliation and that you want the same version in the pharmacovigilance database as in your clinical database. Considerations might as well be that you start a lot of trials at the same time point. Some finish earlier, others run longer, and you want to have them all on the same version, but you don't want to upgrade the trials which stopped earlier, so you stay on the initial MedDRA version. So it's really for clinical trials there is a decision process why and lots of good reasons for or against upgrading to a new MedDRA version. What is important is that when you're running a query on a data set, they need to have the same MedDRA version, because otherwise you will not find certain terms, and that would be a problem. If you're interested in further resources on MedDRA versioning, there is always the What's New document, and also a webinar for the What's New, which describes changes to the MedDRA version. There's a MedDRA version report which comes with your with the MedDRA version. And we have the MedDRA version analysis tool, which can compare any two MedDRA versions against each other. And for considerations on versioning, so whether to upversion or not, we have the MedDRA best practice document, which gives some guidance and considerations which you would need to discuss and decide upon. Okay, so let's look at what can happen with changes to the MedDRA version. And these are, of course, old MedDRA versions, but they still show nicely what can happen. So in your data, in MedDRA version 21.1, you had a PT fractured ischium with 15 events and pelvic fracture with 5 events. Then you go to MedDRA version 23 and suddenly you see, oh, pelvic fracture has 20 events. Last time it just had 5. So what happened? If you're not looking at your data, if you did not look at what's new or the changes to the MedDRA version, you might be first a bit alarmed that pelvic fracture happens so frequently. If you compare the two MedDRA versions, you see that fractured ischium is no longer a PT, but now it's an LLT under pelvic fracture. So all your 15 events from before, they move together with the LLT, now LLT, the pelvic fracture, which increased the case count to 20. So actually nothing happened, and just the change in the MedDRA version makes your data look different. It could also happen that, and it happened also between 21.1 and 23.0, that we decided that vascular cognitive impairment, which has a clear link to the vascular component in this, is badly placed under the psychiatry SOC. This PT had 20 events, and it seems your psychiatry disorder SOC just had those 20 events. So next time you look at your data, psychiatric disorder SOC does not have any events, but the count in your nervous system disorder SOC increased to 20. So you might be alarmed, but it's also just because we considered the placement of this PT and moved it to the nervous system disorder SOC because it's better placed there. These are changes which can affect your data, and we show these to illustrate that knowing what changed in MedDRA will help you understand what changed in your data. And with that, I wanted to address again the MedDRA version analysis tool. It's a web-based tool. You can find it on our meddra.org webpage. And also it is included in the new MedDRA web-based browser. It is free to all users, and it has a version report generator, which produces an Excel sheet for any two versions. So you can take the 22.1 to 23.0 as we saw before, but you could also take version 19 to version 27. Then it has the possibility to create a data impact report. And this means you can upload a specific set of MedDRA terms into the MVAT tool, and it identifies changes based on your data. This is often quite helpful to see whether a MedDRA version had an impact on your or how big the MedDRA version impact is on your safety data. So if you retrieve the counts and the PTs from your LLTs from your database, you run the version report and gives you an assessment of how much in your data changed. And then you can search terms and can identify changes to a single MedDRA term or code. I think this might not be in the MedDRA browser, because there we have the option to see the history of a single term. Okay. The MedDRA version analysis tool has a user interface and also report available in all MedDRA languages. You can also run a report on supplemental changes. Supplemental changes are those changes which we are discussing now, or which we decided upon now, which are for the next MedDRA version. They haven't been released as a new MedDRA version yet, but you can still already check what will change for the next MedDRA version. It also provides the option to run the reports, including the secondary SOC changes. And we don't have enough time here to, and it's not the main focus of this webinar either, to discuss the MedDRA version analysis tool in detail. But there's a two-part webinar which you can find on our trainings materials page, and the address is given here. If there are questions to this, we could keep them for the end and discuss them if there's time over. And I'm happy to show you how to access the MVAT and how to run a version report if needed. Okay. So let's go more into detail in how MedDRA can be used in data retrieval, presentation, and analysis. Let me show you this first. So this could be a graphical example of showing your data by primary SOC. And this is a very nice graphic, because just by looking at it, you see that there's a very long bar in the psychiatric disorders SOC, nervous system disorders, gastrointestinal disorders, and general disorders and administration site conditions. And this would help you in focusing your priorities, your attention, where to further investigate for your product. So an overview by primary SOC can help a lot with this. It gives a broad overview. The PTs are only displayed once, but the limitations can be that you have incomplete groupings of certain PTs due to the SOC allocation rules, and it can be a lengthy output, although with this graphic it was nice and short. It is relevant, or it's meaningful, to use the internationally agreed order of SOCs when needed. And this is, for example, the EU SMPC guideline. And this helps because if you're thinking about different languages, not all of the SOCs are called differently. And if you put them in alphabetical order, you would not see the same SOC in German at the same location as in English or in French. So it makes a lot of sense to have this internationally agreed order of SOCs, because then you have the most important SOCs at the top and going to the less important disorders to the end. You can find the international agreed order of SOCs in the MedDRA introductory guide, as well as in the ASCII files, which are provided with every MedDRA version. When you're using the primary SOC or the SOC overviews, also consider the use of HLTs and HLGTs. As I showed you before, for the investigation SOCs, it might help a lot to group your terms more than just showing the PTs. You already get them grouped by HLT into a more meaningful way than just showing a lot of PTs under the main SOC. And this can be done in line listings, in tables and graphs. And we already saw this nice graph showing us where to focus our attention. This is an output or an example of a line listing, which is containing the complete MedDRA hierarchy. So you see the SOC, nervous system disorders. You see some of its HLGTs. Under the HLGT, you see the HLTs and then the PT, or in this case, several HLTs plus then the PTs, which are under that HLT. And you see that it already groups the PTs into meaningful sub concepts. For very few PTs, like shown on this slide, it's not. It increases the size of the table which you're looking at. But if you have a lot of different PTs, it helps you a lot in focusing and grouping the terms in meaningful buckets already. This is using the MedDRA hierarchy and MedDRA characteristics to look at data. Sometimes you need focus searches. When you have a concept of interest and you want to investigate this further, it's meaningful to focus your search on a particular topic. And for this, you could either use the secondary SOC assignment. So if you say, we are going to look at an example of immune-mediated disorders, you could use the secondary SOC assignment. Often you need some programming. If your database does not automatically allow you an output by secondary SOC. The benefits are you can get a more comprehensive view of medically related events, because some will be distributed into different SOCs based on our SOC allocation rules. And with this secondary SOC, you can group them together again. One limitation is if you would display the primary and the secondary SOC together in your complete data set, this could lead to double counting of events. So that is why when you're displaying the complete data set, you usually use the primary SOC. For focus searches, you can use the secondary SOC. We already addressed using HLTs and HLGTs for grouping of terms. And of course, there are also the standardized MedDRA queries, the SMQs, or customized searches, which can be either modifications to an existing standardized MedDRA query or an ad hoc query which you set up for a specific concept. As said in the beginning, SMQs is not part of our topic today, but we will look at how to set up a search, but customized searches we will also discuss in the next webinar. So this is now an example of why it might be meaningful to look at the secondary SOCs. And in this example, we have a list of PTs, and they are sorted by SOC. But the question is, how many cases of autoimmune diseases do we expect in this data set? And looking at the PTs, we can start. Okay, autoimmune neutropenia. Yes, this is autoimmune. It's already in the name. Same for autoimmune myocarditis. It's quite easy to identify this as an autoimmune disease. Then we come to a PT Evans syndrome. I'm a doctor, I'm a medical professional, but Evans syndrome, this was a long time ago that I heard about it. maybe never. So I would need to check what it is and whether it's autoimmune or not. Let's look at the endocrine. Polyglandular autoimmune. Thanks a lot for putting the autoimmune into it. Thyroid disorder is a very general. Birdshot chorioretinopathy. I'm not an ophthalmologist. Autoimmune uveitis. Okay, this is easy. Primary biliary cholangitis. There was something back in my mind. Let's see. And as well, now I find the SOC, immune system disorders. How nice. But unfortunately, it just has one PT, which is autoimmune disorder, which already has the autoimmune in its term name. But otherwise, there is nothing. So let's go on. Musculoskeletal arthritis, polymyalgia rheumatica, rheumatoid arthritis. These are definitely candidates. But then for the skin, vitiligo might be, might not be. So this is where I now stand. What can I do? Of course, I can take all these PTs, start investigating in medical literature, see whether they have a relationship to autoimmune diseases. Maybe I can use some form of artificial intelligence to make this task more efficient. But I could also go to the MedDRA browsers, because I remember, yes, we have the multi-axiality. So I could check in MedDRA whether somebody already took that effort for me and decided whether it has the term has a secondary link to the SOC immune system disorders. And this is where I would shortly describe MedDRA browsers. Then we go into the browser and I show you the different ways of looking at the secondary hierarchy which exists. So at the moment we have several browsers. We have the MedDRA desktop browser, which you can download. We have a new version of it. This is still the legacy, so-called legacy browser. But we also have a new version which is more adapted to the new web-based browser, to the outline, which is focused on searching. We have the web-based browsers, the new web-based browser and the legacy web-based browser. What you see in that computer screen is the legacy web-based browser and the new web-based browser I will show you later on. Then we also have the mobile MedDRA browser. Now it depends a bit on your learning style, whether you would like to open the browser, follow what I'm doing, or whether you just lean back, relax, and watch what I'm doing. I put the credentials for the training access to the MedDRA browsers into the slide here. So if you want to follow us, you can see them here. It's also on the next slide, as well as in the chat. But of course, you can also use your normal company credentials to open the MedDRA browsers. So a bit more information about our browsers. If you want to enter it, all of them require MedDRA ID and password. You can view and search MedDRA and also the SMQs. The browsers support all MedDRA languages, and they also have a language-specific interface. So you can change the interface to your language if it's a MedDRA supported language, but also you can have the term list in your MedDRA language. And all of the browsers, no, not all of them, the mobile browser does not. The MedDRA desktop browser and the web-based browsers, they have the ability to export your search results to export them into a file, or to first group them in a research bin and then to export that research bin to your local file system. You can also view primary and secondary link information in the browsers, and you can upload terms to run against SMQs. We will look at that in more detail in the next webinar. You have advanced search options, so you can use the not or. And what is also interesting is you can preview the upcoming or the supplemental changes which will be added to the next release. This is not available in the MedDRA desktop browser because it changes every time we accept a new term. And the MedDRA desktop browser is a downloaded version, so there you cannot see the supplemental changes. Let me just see. So what we want to do is we have this data set, and the terms link to a lot of different primary SOCs, but we want to know which of these terms are autoimmune disorders. And now I have a question for you, because there are different ways to check term hierarchy in including the secondary SOCs in our browsers. And I would like to ask you which one of these options you are most familiar with. So you can put multiple answers and put your most familiar option first if you add multiple. Okay, for the people who are answering none, I think I can help you because I will show it to you. Then I see most people know that there are term details in the browser. Some are familiar with our hierarchy analysis tool, and very few people seem to use the research bin or export search results. Okay. I think then we will be looking at some of these things, and I will show them to you directly. For the research bin, I would wait a bit because we have an exercise in the end where we try to set up a new query, and I would then show you the research bin. But for the search results, hierarchy analysis tool, and term details in browser, I will show you directly. Okay, then let's move on. Let me just open the new web-based browser as well, because then I can show you in both ways. Okay. So this is the old MedDRA browser, and let's take one of our terms, which was birdshot retinopathy. So we find an LLT, birdshot chorioretinopathy. I click on it. Actually, it should show me the terms. I think we have a problem with our browser here. Let's do it in the other one. Birdshot retinopathy. You see, this one has a cleaner interface. It's very much optimized for searching. We find our birdshot chorioretinopathy. You can open the MedDRA hierarchy by always clicking on these small pluses and minuses, and we see autoimmune disorders. And this, of course, goes into the SOC immune system disorders. And then we have the primary SOC. And this is, again, what was asked about the legend. And I can open the legend here. This highlight around the SOC, the square around the SOC, means it's the primary SOC. Let's have a look at the legend first. In the new web-based browser, you find it here under the, they always call it hamburger menu. You have the legend. It opens up. You have the legend for the SOC as well as for the SMQs. And you see, depending on the colors, it means that you have certain different things. So if you open, sorry, it disappeared. Let's open the list of PTs. You see here, it has the green ones, the blue ones, unfortunately no red ones. But if you look at the legend again, The blue one, the blue square means it's a multi-axial primary term. So this one has its primary link to the SOC, General Disorders and Administration Site Conditions. The green one means it's a multi-axial secondary term. So if you want to know what is the other SOC, the primary SOC of this term, we can click on Open Details and Occurrences, and a new window opens. You see it has 3 links, and one of them, the primary one, is to infections and infestations. Okay, let's open the legend again. Then, as I already told you, when you're looking at the SOC, the highlight with the blue square around the SOC means it's the primary SOC. And then we also had the LLT, the non-current LLT term. And the synonym term, I think this is just for the Japanese so far, because the Japanese MedDRA version has synonym terms included. And then for the SMQ legend, we can take that in the next webinar next week. So what you can do is you can open the complete hierarchy. I think it's a bit annoying that you need to click so often. So what you can also do is you take your LLT or PT or whatever level you want to take, and you go to Open Details and Occurrences, and the window opens. You get the complete view of the SOCs, and you see the primary SOC. You also get more information on the term. You see in which SMQs it is included. Also see which version it was added and modified in an SMQ. Another way to see it is if you take this go to browser. If there is more than one SOC to choose from, you would also need to choose which SOC to go to, but you also see which is the primary one and which are the secondary SOCs. So this is how to see it in the term details in the browser. Then this is now just one search results. Let's take something different. We also had, let's take myocarditis. And our term in our list was autoimmune myocarditis. But we have a lot of search results here. So if you click on export, you have certain export options. You can export the complete hierarchy. You can export the secondary SOC information, and you can export the currency. And here we also have a non-current LLT, which I was searching for before. So if you click on export, it's a very quick search is done, and a new Excel file is downloaded from the internet. And in that Excel file, you see the HLTs, which were found by my search. You see the PTs, and you see the LLTs. So usually we would be looking at the PT for our analysis. And now when you filter the information, you could just say that I want all which are in the immune system disorders SOC. And you get a list of myocarditis, which is in immune system disorders. And again, here at the end, you see none of these have the immune system disorders as the primary SOC. So the N stands for no. If it's the primary SOC, you have a yes, the Y for a yes. So this is the way you can use the export function to see the secondary SOC information and the primary SOC information as well, which you always get in addition. And then now I have, this can be, then we have some tools implemented into the new browser here. In the old browser, you have everything as buttons on the top. And here you would have the hierarchy analysis tool. In the new browser, you go to this Tools button, you click on it, you have the MWAT tool, which we can look into if there's interest after the main part of this webinar. You have the hierarchy analysis tool and you have the SMQ analysis tool. If you want to use the hierarchy analysis tool, you need to have your data in a Excel format, and you also have some export options. You can export the secondary SOC, HLGT, and HLTs. You define your language as well as the MedDRA version which you want to analyze and export. Then if you click Next, the tool also tells you how your data should be formatted. And it's very important that you have your MedDRA term name in the second column. The row ID is optional, and the LLT-PT code is not necessary for if you are doing a search for English, but it needs to be filled if you're doing it for any other MedDRA language. So I have prepared a file, which I thought I had opened. Let me check. I'll show you my file first. So we have row ID in column A, we have the term name, and we have the term code. I need to close this file again. I click here to choose the file. It's uploading, it's doing the analysis, and if I open my file, you see what I've done. Hierarchy analysis. This is the file name. It tells you when it was done, at what time. It also gives you the MedDRA version, English 28.1, and it tells you that secondary SOC was included, HLGTs and HLTs were all included. So if you enable editing, this is now our data, which we wanted to analyze from the slides which I showed you. We put a filter to our data. And you see again, many of the terms are coming up twice or even maybe more times. So these are the ones where you have secondary SOCs. And again, at the end, you see whether it's a primary or a secondary SOC. For humans, it's highlighted in different colors so that you see when a new term starts. But what we would do now is that we take the SOC immune system disorders, and we see out of the list of terms which we had, these, let's see how many rows, 11 rows are autoimmune disorder terms. So when you're tasked with looking at a certain data set and identifying terms based on something, it might help to look at the secondary hierarchy to identify, for example, like here, the autoimmune disorders. And let's go back to our presentation. So this is what we've done. This is now the grouping of the secondary hierarchy, the HLGT autoimmune disorders and the SOC immune system disorders. And somebody was so nice to already add the number of cases. You would always need to be careful to not just add them up, because one case could have more than one PT included. So you always need to also query for the number of cases in the HLGT, for example. Okay, Leander, I think this is again a good time to ask whether there are any questions regarding the secondary hierarchy analysis.
Not about that, Anne, but there was one about is there any documentation that shows what changes have been made within MedDRA between each versions?
Yes, there is documentation. So you can, if you're looking at consecutive versions, you can take the version analysis which is provided with the MedDRA version. If you are looking at non-consecutive versions, the MedDRA version analysis tool is the best way to do it. And maybe take a very quick look at it. So in the tools part of the new MedDRA web-based browsers, you have the MVAT version report, and you can select different versions to compare against each other. They don't need to be consecutive, so the starting version could be 23.1, the ending version could be 28.1. You can include or exclude the secondary SOC information, and you can even decide whether you want to see it for the complete MedDRA or whether you just want to see it for one or two or any number of SOCs. And then you just say run version report. It takes a few seconds, and it will give you first a new website which highlights the changes. So these are a lot of versions to compare against each other. Usually if you take versions which are closer to each other, it takes less time. But now after half a minute, it gives you a nice comparison saying how many new PTs have been added between these versions, promotions, demotions, and so on. And you can export everything, or you can select just the information you're interested in. You can export it to a spreadsheet. And again, a new Excel sheet opens, and you have the summary. It also gives you the exact information, what was compared, and then you have different tabs to look into the details of what changed in each MedDRA version. As well, if you want to, and I'm not going to show this because we have separate webinars which you could just watch online. We have the data impact report where you can upload a similarly formatted file as the one which I showed you with your MedDRA coded data, and it gives you an analysis of what changed between the versions within your data set. For this, it makes sense to have multiple rows for a PT, for example, or LLT, which has been coded several times, because then it gives you really the impact on your data. Okay, then let's move on. Now I would like to go into details of how we can develop queries by using MedDRA. And before we go into building a query, let's look at what is a query. So you have your data in your database. Let's say it's a safety database. Your data is coded to an LLT. And maybe you store the PT information in your database as well. And then you build a query and you define a set of PTs which define your topic, your safety topic of interest. And all the LLTs belonging to these PTs will also be in that query. And then you compare either on LLT level or on PT level, depending on what you have in your database. And if there is a hit, like here, between LLT1 and LLT1, this case will be pulled for analysis or for counting. That is what a query does. So when you want to build a new query, of course, it's very important to know what is the definition of your safety topic. And you need to first understand the question you're looking at. You need to define the condition, and it helps to develop in and exclusion criteria. To be able to do that, you have a lot of resources available. You can look into medical textbooks. There's a lot of review articles freely available on PubMed. You might have other medical resources available in your company, which you can use online. But it's important to check what am I dealing with, because usually we are not experts on everything by definition, but we need to read up on the topic. We need to define in- and exclusion criteria, and then we start building the query. And sometimes we can use grouping terms like the HLT, HLGT. We need to make sure that we also consider the non-multi-axial SOCs, like the investigations, the medical and surgical procedure, and the social circumstances. It makes a lot of sense once you find some terms, like for the myocarditis, which we were looking at, to look at neighboring terms, to look at what other kind of myocarditis terms are there in MedDRA, and also to look at the secondary locations. So if you see myocarditis, we have the maybe autoimmune myocarditis. Maybe we find something in immune system disorders, which is also closely related. Then usually we don't use LLTs when building queries. One exception might be if we are very interested in one species, we might look at the LLT level in the SOC infections and infestations. But usually queries are built on PT level, and it's easier to break it down into LLTs after the search and to look at the LLTs of interest than to define the query on LLT level. And then it's also maybe meaningful to store the query for future use. But before using it again, you would need to review the impact of new MedDRA versions and to adapt your query to that new MedDRA version. So looking at an example, we would like to start building a query for cardiac arrhythmias. And we've been looking at cardiac arrhythmias already, and we saw in one of the previous slides that there is an HLGT, which is called cardiac arrhythmias. And as we know, this is our obvious starting point, and we often call this top-down search. So if you're thinking about a cardiac problem, the SOC cardiac disorders is our starting point, and we find the HLGT cardiac arrhythmias. And we say, yes, a lot of our work is already done because we can take this or we can review this HLGT and maybe take the complete HLGT. The other thing which we can do is we have a nice term, which is arrhythmia. We could just put that into our search functionality in the browser. And we usually call this bottom-up search because it will retrieve all the LLTs and PTs, which include the term arrhythmia. So this is something which we always do. We start from our topic top down, but also include some of the relevant search terms in our search function and do a bottom-up search. And then we already discussed that there are some non-multi-axial SOCs, and we should also consider these. Maybe we don't find arrhythmia in the multi-axial SOCs, but we can consider that arrhythmia patients often have a pacemaker, so we could search for pacemaker. And we might find something in the medical and surgical procedures SOC or also in the social circumstances SOC. We might think about investigations done for assessing arrhythmia, and ECG could be one, electrocardiogram, but also the long-term, the Holter ECG might be a more relevant investigation for looking at arrhythmias. So thinking about these SOCs, we might find more interesting terms to put into our search strategy. And this is one example of the SOC investigations where we could find a term like heart rate irregular, which is kind of the definition of an arrhythmia. And we should also review other terms in the HLT ECG investigations and heart rate and pulse investigations. For the SOC surgical and medical procedures, we might find the implantable defibrillator insertion, in the HLT cardiac device therapeutic procedures. Or we might find a term like cardioversion in HLT cardiac therapeutic procedures NEC. And in this note, it already tells you that we have an SMQ cardiac arrhythmias, but as we are not talking about SMQs today, let's just focus on the thinking behind how to set up a query. And some of these terms, like the pacemaker terms, they are not included in the SMQ cardiac arrhythmias. So if you think that they are important, it is a medical decision to include or exclude terms based on your specific question and the in- and exclusion criteria which you define. And then it becomes a bit interesting because many of the disorders can, or diagnosis can produce signs and symptoms. But if you include signs and symptoms, your search will get broader and you might retrieve cases which are not relevant for your specific question. So it's always a decision on whether to include a lot of terms, not to miss any of the relevant cases, but increasing the risk that you retrieve cases which you're not interested in, which is called, sensitivity. So you're including a lot, but you get also a lot of cases, or potentially get a lot of cases which you're not interested in, but you're not missing anything. Or you include only those cases with a high specificity, so meaning they are very relevant for your search, but you might miss one or two cases which are coded in a more general way, or which are just reporting signs and symptoms, but not the diagnosis. So when considering to adding signs and symptoms, you could be looking into different HLTs, for example, disturbances in consciousness NEC, or neurological signs and symptoms NEC. You could look at cardiac disorders NEC, cardiac signs and symptoms NEC, or dyspneas even, because also shortness of breath is one of the symptoms of, or can be one of the symptoms of cardiac arrhythmia. So lots of things which you can consider to add, but which might also be noisy in your search. And then, of course, you have outcomes which could be related to cardiac arrhythmia, like the cardiac death, which you might want to review just because they are so important outcomes that you don't want to miss any of these cases. So you could consider including the PT cardiac death, which can be found in death and sudden deaths. And this is really because of the relevance of the outcome, and because cardiac arrhythmias can lead to cardiac death. Okay, this is now a lot about the thinking behind setting up a search. And this is just a line listing. So what I showed you was more like a search based on MedDRA terms, how to think about MedDRA terms. You could go the other way around and look at your data and identify cases which you would like to review, and also consider whether any of the PTs coded in those terms, in those cases, could be used as search terms for your query. So if looking at this list of cases, maybe we would like to look at the sudden death. So in the end, we could include this term into our search strategy. You might be interested to see the case number 3, electrocardiogram abnormal, cardiorespiratory arrest, dyspnea. There are some things which would fit to a cardiac arrhythmia. Nothing is specific about it, but we might want to look at this case. Case number 4, breast cancer and postmenopause, is very unlikely related to cardiac arrhythmia, so no terms to be chosen from this one. Number 5, palpitation and syncope. Yes, palpitations and also the syncope could be due to a cardiac arrhythmia. So maybe this is a case we would like to include. Then number 6, pacemaker-generated arrhythmia. Yes, this person already has a pacemaker. Let's include this term as well. Then we have patient 07, atrial fibrillation and cardioversion. This is a clear case of a cardiac arrhythmia. You have the atrial fibrillation, which is an arrhythmia, plus the treatment for it. Then we have number 8, long QT syndrome congenital. Long QT syndrome is a risk factor for arrhythmias. Maybe, maybe not included. Then we have a term 09, cerebrovascular accident and prostate cancer. It's coded as unlikely here. I would maybe want to look at it because cerebrovascular accident can also be due to cardiac arrhythmias. And here you see there is medical judgment needed, and people might decide differently on which, how many cases to include for further review, or which ones are rather unlikely and should not be included. So this is where you can see that there is some room for discussion, what kind of terms to add and what kind of cases to retrieve from your search. Okay, and then for the last one, we have the social circumstances cardiac assistance device user, which we might want to review also for arrhythmias. Okay, now I would like to demonstrate how we can do this in the browser, and our topic is cardiac failure, so heart failure. And we would like to build a query with a set of PTs relevant to this condition. And we can consider diagnosis terms, signs and symptoms, investigations, surgical, medical procedures. And the first thing I wanted you to do is to please provide some suggestions for searching. And then we will take it to the web-based browser and really set up a query. So please add some of your thoughts. I see first people typing. The question is for cardiac failure. Okay. Atrial fibrillation. I like the starting with the SOC cardiac disorders. Heart failure would be my preferred, or cardiac failure would be my preferred search terms if I do a bottom-up search. Yes, definitely. Type cardiac failure and see what the results are. Yes. So cardiac disorders. Okay. You can still continue typing because we can go back and see what else you considered. And I will start in the browser to do some of your suggestions. So on the one hand, we say we start top down and open the cardiac disorders. And we see the HLGTs. So we have cardiac arrhythmias, cardiac neoplasm, valve disorders, but then we find heart failures, which is already an HLGT, which sounds very promising. And it gives us several possibilities. We have right ventricular failures, left ventricular failures. We have the heart failures NEC, and we have heart failure signs and symptoms. So it makes sense to look into these. Okay, ascites, edema. Oh yes, these are a lot of terms which are interesting for us. And as you see, most of these are not linked with a primary link to the cardiac disorders, but with the secondary, the green ones like ascites, edema terms, and so on. Here we have one of the red ones, which is then a single axial SOC. so just going to cardiac disorders, and the blue one is going directly to, as a primary SOC, to cardiac disorders. If you look at the heart failures NEC, we see also a lot of relevant terms, not all of them linked primarily or single axially to the cardiac disorders. And then we have the left and right ventricular failures. So I think we have a lot of interesting and important terms which we find through this top-down search. And now I would like to show you several options of how you can take some of these terms and add them to something which we call a research bin. So you can right-click on a term, and then it gives you two options: add to research bin and add selected levels to research bin. As we are adding a PT, and PT is the level which you want, we can just say add to research bin. And it opens, and we have the PT added here. Now we also have this secondary SOC included. For now, I would remove it because we just need it once. And this is defining our search strategy. On the other hand, as we looked at the HLT and HLGT and decided, yes, it has lots and lots of important terms, we could also say, right-click on the HLT or even at the HLGT, let's do that. And we can say add selected levels to research bin. And then we would like to add all the PTs, no, PT is here, under that HLT to our research bin. And you see it populates a lot and lots of terms. And I hope, let's see, we have those terms which also have the, let's look for the congestive hepatopathy, which is not a primary link. So maybe we need to add it here. I'm not seeing it yet. Maybe it's, we need to, we will export it and then see it again. So let's add this at PT level to the research bin. Okay. And we could call this heart failure. Okay. In addition, what else would we like to do to find more terms? You already mentioned that we could search for heart failure or cardiac failure. And what you see, we have an exact match, which gives you heart failure. It also shows you lexical variance, which is the inverted word order, but it also always provides with synonyms. So heart and cardiac are synonyms, so it gives you a lot of terms related to heart or cardiac. Let's look at the PTs. So we could take the radiation associated cardiac failure and add that to our research bin. And then we also said most of these are likely already included in our heart failures NEC. So by going down the hierarchy, we have found a lot of these terms. But which ones would we not have found? The ones which are single axial and not in cardiac disorders. So did we have any nice proposals related to the investigations? we could look at we could open the investigations, also top down, and look at cardiac and vascular investigations. Cardiac imaging procedures might be a good one, because often you check with ultrasonography. And we could take a cardiac ventriculogram abnormal. Perfusion is not a good one. Maybe check the cardiothoracic ratio increased as a term, because usually when you have heart failure, you often have a dilated form of heart failure. So this term might be added to the research bin. And then we might also want to see something in surgical and medical procedures, and find cardiac procedures. So maybe we find a device. We could think about a very relevant form of a heart failure where the patient needs an artificial heart implant. So this would be a term which we could add to the research bin. And then I think due to time reasons, we would stop here and not find more terms. But we could export the research bin and have a nice overview of all the terms which we chose. And if you filter by primary SOC, then you just see them once, not several times. Okay. Then let's look at what we discussed today. We have, with MedDRA, we have a very powerful tool for data retrieval. It requires medical knowledge, but also solid MedDRA knowledge. And we have very granular MedDRA version with a huge size and complexity. And this can overcome a lack of specificity of other terminologies, but it also requires that we use a creative approach to data retrieval. And we also discussed that as we put a lot of effort into developing queries, it is also worth the effort to share and to store in-house queries. So let's see, we discussed the MedDRA data retrieval and presentation points to consider document. We discussed applications of MedDRA in data retrieval and presentation. And we discussed and demonstrated the use of MedDRA for developing queries, as well as some of our MedDRA tools which can help you with that. Then I jump over the MSSO context. You have that in your downloaded version. And I'm happy to take a few questions, but unfortunately we are already at the time of at the end time. So Leander, do we have a short question?
Thanks, Anna. Yes. So in short, this technique that you've just shown us where you were accessing in the browser is useful for PSRUs and signal detections.
No, actually it's helpful to build queries for any safety topic you need to analyze. Often you find safety topics, or you need to analyze safety topics in your PSURs or in signal, or you find a topic in signal detection, and then you can build a query for further analysis. But safety topics can also come from preclinical data, from literature data, from all different possible angles. And this approach is helpful to define a search strategy based on MedDRA coded data to identify cases of interest which you would like to review further.
Thank you, Anne. So there was a follow-up with that. So I import my cases, and these research bins help me to find the clues and cases needed to be overviewed. That's what you've just said.
No, because you cannot upload your cases into our MedDRA tools. You can do that for assessing changes to the MedDRA version. You can upload your PTs. But what you do is you define a search strategy, and this search strategy you apply on your database. Sometimes you might be able to do that yourself. Otherwise, often companies have database technicians who do that search for you. But as a PV professional, you need to tell those people which PTs to search for. So the medical thinking goes into building the search strategy. The search strategy is often given to technical personnel who run the query and give you back the results from your database.
Thanks, Anne. And I think that's all the questions that we have at the moment. I think we've answered all. Oh, no, there's one. Yeah, the person's just come back. Thank you.
Okay, so, perfect. Then I don't want you to take you longer than we planned to hold you. Thanks a lot for participating in this webinar. Thanks for all your questions, because I think it's always a bit more interesting if people ask questions and I can really answer to the needs of the audience. Thanks a lot also, Leander, for facilitating and helping me to monitor the questions and reading them out to me. And then I just wish you a nice rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.